Once you understand how you can create the Google and GitHub login, let's take a look at how you can create your own credential login inside this application. So what we are going to do is we're going to allow user to sign up with this register page, and once the user successfully register, he can sign in with their email and password. So let's take a look at how we can do it. So before we add credential inside nextauth file, let's take a look at how we can get the values from these input text boxes. For that, in this course, I'm using a library called Formik. And using this library, I'm going to build a simple form with validation. So you have to search for Formik and click on this formik.org website and click on this get started. When you click on it, you have some documentation here. To use Formik, you have to say here npm install Formik. Let me copy this command and then open my terminal. And here I'm going to say npm install Formik -- save. So this is going to install this Formik inside this application. Now, just for that, you have different options to use Formik. You can use Formik as a component, or you can use Formik as a hook. I'm using Formik as a hook. So I'm going to click on this tutorial, scroll down. Here you can see you have some basic information of Formik. To use Formik, you have to call the hook, which is use Formik inside your React application. And then you have to call that hook and specify the initial values to your input text boxes. And then when you submit your form, you can get all the values of your input text boxes inside the values variable. And then to this input text box, you have to specify onChange event, as well as you have to pass value attribute. So the Formik can get values from this input text boxes. So inside my login.js, right here, let me close all these files. Right here inside my login, let me add Formik. So at the top, here I'm going to say import. In the object, you specify use Formik from, in the single quote, you specify Formik. And just out of that, inside this login, I'm simply going to say constant Formik is equal to use Formik. And inside this hook, you can specify different options. So inside an object, you first specify the initial value. So you call a property initial values. Inside an object, you specify your input text boxes name. So I have email. So I'm going to say here email and pass value. And then I also have password inside my form. So I'm going to say here password and pass value to this password. Then to this Formik, you can access the onSubmit handler function. Instead of creating this onSubmit inside this Formik object, I'm going to create a async function here. So I'm going to say here async function onSubmit and then specify here values. Now you're going to get all your input text boxes values inside this variable. Just for now, I'm going to say here console.log values, and you have to pass this onSubmit to this Formik hook right here, just out of this object. You specify here comma and say onSubmit. Now we don't have to worry about the property because the property name is onSubmit and you're passing the same function name to this property. If you have a different name to this onSubmit, you can specify here colon and then specify your function name, something like this. But I have the same property name to this function, so instead of this colon, I'm going to specify this onSubmit here. Now just out of that, let me scroll down. And as you can see, I have here input text boxes. Now let me specify here Formik onChange event. If you back to the Formik documentation, then you can notice you have to add onChange to the input text boxes with their name. And you also need to specify the value attribute. So right down here to this input text box, here I'm going to say onChange is equal to, in the object you specify Formik, this Formik constant variable dot handle change. You don't need to create this method because Formik will automatically handle it whenever there is a change inside this input text box. So if you type anything inside this input text box, the handle change is automatically going to fire. Just out of that, you specify value here, and value is going to be Formik dot values dot email. As you know, inside these values, you have all your input text boxes values. Let me do the same for the second input text box. So let me copy this, pass that right here. And instead of this values email, now I'm going to specify values dot password. You already have this password property to these values. This is because you initialize this password property at the top. You can see I'm going to specify that values to this input text boxes. Let me open the console, and if I type here daily@gmail.com, then I'm going to type my password, and when I click on this login button, it's not going to do anything, because you can see to this form you don't have onSubmit handler function. So what you have to do is you have to pass this handler function, this onSubmit handler function, to this form. So to pass that, you specify here onSubmit, and right here you specify Formik dot handle submit. These all are the Formik method. You don't have to create this. You are accessing these methods using this Formik instance. Back to the project, reload it, and now if I specify here daily@gmail.com, then specify some password here. When I click on this login button, you can see I'm going to get a response inside my console. Later, I'm going to add validation to this input text boxes. Just for now, just back to the Formik, and when you scroll down, the handle submit is a submission handler. So whenever there is a change inside input, select, or text area text box, this handler function is going to execute, and the values is going to be the current values of the Formik form. When you scroll down, here you have all the information of this form. Using this function, you can remove all the boilerplate code of your Formik form. So you don't have to use onChange, handle change, onBlur, handle blur to your input text box. Just need to say Formik.getFieldProps. When you scroll down, you can see the use of this getFieldProps. So let me just do the same for this login page. So instead of these properties, simply going to pass here curly braces, and here I'm going to first pass spread operator, and then I'm going to say here Formik.getFieldProps. And inside this parentheses, in the single quote, I'm going to specify the name of this input text box, email. And let me do the same for this second text box right here. So let me get it up both this statement, and then specify here Formik get field props, and this is for password. Back to the project, and if I click on this login, this is still going to work fine.